Hi everyone. Thank you for joining me here today. Today we are going to talk about data governance, but not in the way it's usually presented. So this session, it isn't about policies, committees, or compliance checklist. It's about a very real challenge organizations are facing right now. With regards to AI and analytics are moving faster than our ability to trust, explain, and control them. So we are no longer just managing data, we are governing decisions, models, and outcomes that directly affect customers and the company revenue and their reputation. So that's why governance matters more than today than are before. When governance is done poorly, it feels like friction. It slows approvals, it restricts access, and endless rules. But when governance is done right, it becomes almost invisible. It builds trust, it enables the transparency among teams, and it actually increases the speed. So, for the next few minutes, I want to challenge some common myths about data governance, share what I have seen work and fail across organizations, and show how modern governance can enable AI safely without slowing innovation. So, my goal is that you leave this session with a clearer understanding of what governance really is, why many programs struggle, and how to design governance that helps your organization move faster but not slower. Before we get into the details, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Rajesh Vayala, work as a principal data architect, and I have spent a little over a decade working with SQL Server, Oracle, and many other on-prem databases and enterprise data platforms across both on-prem and cloud environments. Most of my work has been around modernization, whereas helping organizations move from traditional on-prem setups into a hybrid and cloud architecture while balancing the performance, cost, security, and operational realities. I have spent a lot of time at the intersection of the modern analytical platforms, helping the teams decide, what to migrate, what not to migrate, and how to avoid common pitfalls along the way. I'm very passionate about data democratization and building AI-ready platforms, but always with a strong foundation in governance, performance, and trust, because without those, modernization doesn't scale. To set expectations for today's session, we will start by looking at why data governance is so widely misunderstood and why that misunderstanding causes many programs to fail before they deliver value. From there, we will clarify the difference between data governance and data management because confusing those two concepts create a lot of unnecessary friction. We will then address some of the most common myths around governance and replace them with practical real world realities. In the second half, we'll focus on governance in the age of AI, why traditional approaches are no longer sufficient, and how trust, transparency, and accountability becomes critical as the decisions scale. Finally, we will look at what effective governance actually looks like in practice and close with a set of clear takeaways you can apply, whether you're leading strategy, building platforms, or working hands-on with data. So what is data governance and why it matters, So as at its core, data governance is about clarity and accountability around data. It defines like who owns data, how it should be used, how quality is maintained, and how risks are managed across the organization. So without governance, data may exist everywhere, but trust exists nowhere, right? So teams work with conflicting definitions, inconsistent metrics, and unclear responsibilities. That's where like governance becomes important because data is no longer just supporting decisions, right? It is driving decisions, particularly nowadays with analytics and AI driven systems. When governance is done well, it ensures that data is accurate, data is secure, and responsibly used while still being accessible to the people who need to access it. And most importantly, good data governance doesn't slow the organization down. Rather, it enables faster, more confident decision making by removing confusion, reducing the rework, and creating a shared understanding of what the data truly means. When I ask organizations about their biggest data governance challenges, the answers are usually like very consistent, regardless of in industry, whether it's financial, healthcare, or the maturity, whether it's a huge firm or a smaller firm. The most common issue is unclear about data ownership, So teams doesn't know who is responsible for the definitions, who is the responsible for quality or any access related decisions, so that's where like everything slows down. So that uncertainty leads directly to slow approval process where simple data requests turn into a long chain of emails and meetings. So over time, this erodes like the trust in the data itself, so different dashboards show different numbers and people spend more time debating the metrics, rather than making decisions, so now with artificial intelligence in the mix, so these challenges are amplified, leaders are increasingly concerned about the AI risk, the regulatory compliance and accountability, and questions like, where the data came from, whether it's biased, and who is responsible if a model produces the wrong outcome. So the key point is that these challenges are not isolated problems. They are the symptoms of governance, that hasn't been are designed to scale with modern data and AI use, and so that's where we have to take all this into consideration when we are coming up with a better data governance framework and policies and all this checklist to establish the data governance team within an organization. And the other thing, one of the other biggest challenge with data governance is not the frame itself, right? But how it is perceived, So many teams experience governance as a restriction, something that limits their access, adds extra steps, and slows down delivery. It often feels like a red tape, more rules, more approvals, and more documentation without a clear payoff. That perception basically comes from governance that was designed around the control rather than outcome, So the reality, however, is very different, So when governance is designed well, it actually enables trust and speed by clarifying ownership, standardizing the definitions, and building confidence in data quality, Uh, and also the other thing is governance removes the constant back and forth and rework that slows down teams. Instead of debating any numbers or questioning the sources, teams can move faster because they trust the data that they're using. In that sense, good governance, it does not create any friction. It quietly removes it, from the process. And in this slide, I would like to talk about a common confusion in many organizations, what is the data governance and data management, So data governance, it's about defining the rules, the decision rights, and accountability around data, who owns it, how it should be used, and what standards must be followed. Whereas on the other side, data management is about execution, it takes the rules and implements them through systems, pipelines, platforms, and day-to-day operations, if I'd like to say in a simple way to think about it, it's like governance asks, whether what we are doing, the right things with the data, while management focuses on doing those things right. When these two are blurred, governance is often pushed onto the IT teams, and it starts to feel like bureaucracy there. When they are clearly separated but tightly aligned, governance provides more clarity and direction, and data management delivers speed and consistency at a scale. I would like to talk about a real world example, that I have experienced. So in one of the organization or in many organizations, the word customer sounds simple, but it means different things depending on who you ask. So sales may define a customer as anyone with any active contract. Marketing may include whether they're prospects or any leads, and finance may only count customers who have generated revenue, So without governance, each team builds reports and dashboards using their own definition, which leads to conflicting numbers and endless debates about which report is right, So this is where data governance comes in, Governance defines what customer means in specific contexts, such as like reporting, regulatory filing, or AI model training, and assigns an owner responsible for the definition. So once the decision is made, data management takes over. The data engineers implement the logic in the pipeline, and also in the data models and semantic layers, so that the definition is constantly applied across dashboards, analytics, and AI systems. And the result is that a team stop arguing about numbers and start making decisions with confidence, because the meaning of the customer is clear, trusted, and consistently enforced, So one takeaway that I have taken is that governance decide what a customer is, whereas the data management makes sure every system uses the definition consistently. There are few myths about data governance, So when governance, data governance, struggles to gain traction, it almost always because of these common five myths, So the first is the belief that governance is IT's job, So in reality, all these infotech teams, they enables governance, but the business must own data definitions, the quality expectations, and the usage decisions. And the second one is that governance slows team's job, So poorly designed governance can do that, but if we create effective governance, it actually removes bottlenecks by reducing confusion, rework, and conflicting metrics, And another misconception is that governance means cataloging everything, whereas successful programs focus on data that matters most, which is like a business critical or high risk data or any regulatory data, rather than trying to govern every data set at once, And there is also the myth that governance produces perfect data, So governance does not eliminate all errors. It creates the opportunity for accountability, data visibility, and continuous improvement, And finally, many organizations think governance is only about compliance. While compliance is important, the bigger payoff is a better decision making. Again, like the clear definitions, the trusted data, the faster access, and confidence in analytics and AI outcomes, Yeah, the reality. So when we move past the myths, a very different picture of data governance emerges, So in reality, governance is not an IT initiative, it's a business capability, So businesses define what data means and how it should be used, and what good data quality looks like, Whereas the IT provides the platforms and the controls to make that possible at scale, So rather than slowing teams down, the effective governance removes the friction by eliminating any ambiguity, or reducing rework, and preventing endless debates over metrics and definitions, It also doesn't try to govern everything at once. As I said in the previous slide, successful governance programs are intentional and risk-based, focusing first on high value, high risk, and regulatory data, whereas the trust matters most, And the other thing is, governance does not provide or promise on perfect data, Instead, it establishes clear accountability, the visibility and mechanism. And also, it's not the primary goal, right? The real payoff of governance is about better decision making. So this slide brings everything together by connecting perceptions to outcomes, So each myth exists because organizations have experienced governance without clear purpose or business alignment. So in reality, the governance works best when it is business enabled, with IT providing the platforms and automation to support. Instead of slowing teams down, effective governance removes rework by clarifying ownership, definitions and expectation upfront, rather than trying to catalog everything. Strong programs are risk based and focus first on high value and high risk data. So the value of data governance isn't in the rules, it is in the business outcomes that those rules enable. So this slide, it captures the simplest way to explain data governance without using any technical language. So in everyday life, transparency, that doesn't mean giving everyone unrestricted access to everything you own, right? So you share what needs based on what's needed based on the role and responsibility. So the same principle applies to data. So data governance isn't about locking data down or hiding information. It's about making sure the right data is available to the right people for the right purpose. So the sales team needs customer and pipeline data, but not necessarily the financial margins. Whereas the financial teams need detailed revenue and cost data, but not full access to the operational systems. When access is intentional and role based, teams can efficiently work without increasing risk. So this is why good governance enables trust and speed at the same time, and it also protects sensitive information while ensuring people have exactly what they need to do their jobs well. And as I said before, governance isn't about saying no, it's about saying yes, but safely. So in a financial organizations, as we all know, different teams, as I said in the past, work with the different customer data. So we can tie it back to the same example of having sales, finance, and marketing, where they need data to the sensitive data assets, based on the team and the reports on what they are looking for. So that's where the data governance will help us, with not limiting the access, but it aligns access with responsibility of the given team when they are working on the data and decision making insights. When data governance, why governance really fails, the data governance fails, it's rarely because the framework itself isn't wrong, it's because how it is designed and it is, the governance often gets built in isolation by a small group. I have seen in my experience where companies, we used to have like a data governance manager and a couple of folks, SMEs or stewards who are overseeing the entire enterprise databases or the business metadata or technical metadata and creating the lineage. So that's where, like, without meaningful input from any business teams who are expected to adopt it. So it's then communicated in highly technical language, that makes sense to the architects or compliance team, but not to the people actually using the data. So that's why many programs also become rule focused. They emphasize like what teams cannot do instead of clearly explaining the outcomes governance is meant to enable. And over time, this erodes the trust, and people begin to work around governance rather than with it. And when teams don't trust the governance process or don't understand its value, it becomes like a shelfware. And that's why, effective governance succeed only when it's like collaborative and outcome driven and built on trust, rather than control. And governance does not fail because it's too strict. It fails because it's disconnected from how people actually work. And in this slide, so governance succeeds, when it feels when it's felt in execution, not read in documentation. So that's where, like, you have to build a proper governance, not in isolation but collaboratively with the business, rather than just imposing them on it. So that way, like, everyone in the organization understand how teams actually use data, and where friction exists, and what outcomes matter most, uh, rather than just imposing some rules on them. Great data governance is ultimately driven by leadership, not frameworks or tools. So the most effective governance leaders, they start by listening, taking time to understand how teams actually use the data, where friction exists, and what decisions matter most. The focus on translating data initiatives into clear business value, and connecting governance efforts to outcomes like fast reporting, reduce risk, or more reliable AI models. So trust is central to their approach. They work to bridge gaps between business and technology teams, ensuring ownership and accountability are clearly defined without creating any fear or resistance. And also, a strong leader make data quality like measurable, turning the abstract concepts into concrete metrics that teams can act on. And finally, they also enable the psychological safety, creating an environment, where people feel comfortable raising questions, admitting uncertainty, and improving data together. Without this human foundation, even the best governance frameworks struggle to take hold. So that's why the success of data governance depend more on leadership behavior than on technological choices. In this slide, I just documented how governance become real when platforms work together rather than in isolation. For example, in our current employer, the Microsoft Fabric we are using for our cloud modernization project, and it is our enterprise data warehouse. So that provides like the execution layer. It's where the data is ingested, transformed, modeled, and consumed, and all the data quality rules, transformations, and validations live here and are enforced automatically as part of the pipelines and semantic models. And the Microsoft Purview, which is a data governance product from Microsoft, it acts as a visibility and control panel, giving the organization a unified view of the metadata, lineage sensitivity, and usage across Fabric and beyond. It answers critical questions like, where the data come from, how it is used, and what the downstream impact of challenge will be. Um, and in the past, I also worked with Colibra, which is a very good tool that complements this by anchoring like governance in the business. It manages data stewardship, the data ownership, the policies and workflows, and also ensuring accountability doesn't get lost in the technical tooling. Together, Fabric execute governance, Purview observes and enforces, and Colibra, where I feel it's like a more institutionalizes it through business ownership. So when these capabilities are aligned, the governance stops being manual and reactive and becomes like embedded in the process, and it's more scalable and trusted across analytical and AI use cases. Um, So now we are in the age of AI. So that's where like governance or data governance becomes more critical, not less. So AI systems don't just support decisions, right? So they scale them. A single model can influence thousands or even millions of outcomes in real time. The challenge is that whatever exists in the data, like any biases or gaps or errors, also scales just as fast. So without governance, organizations often discover problems only after harm has occurred, and when it's too late to explain or defend their outcome. So that's where like data governance provides the guardrails that make AI trustworthy. It enables explainability by answering questions such as like where the data come from, how it was transformed, why a model made a specific decision, and who is accountable for the decision. So in this context, governance is not about slowing AI down. It is what allows AI to be deployed confidently, responsibly, and at scale. AI it scales fast, but governance is what makes it safe and defensible. As organizations adopt AI at scale, it is important to clearly distinguish between data governance and AI governance. Now, while also understanding how closely they are connected, as we know, data governance focus on the inputs, where data come from, and how it is defined, and who owns it, how its quality is maintained, and how it is protected. Whereas AI governance, on the other hand, focuses on what happens next. How models are trained, validated, deployed, monitored, and retired, and how their relations can be explained and defended. So these two domains cannot operate in silos. Accountability is what connects them. So if a model produces an unexpected or harmful outcome, leaders must be able to trace the decision back through the model logic and all the way to the underlying data. So without strong data governance, AI governance become reactive and fragile. Without AI governance, even well-governed data can be misused. So effective organizations treat them as complementary disciplines that together ensure trust, transparency, and responsible use of AI. So you cannot govern AI outcomes if you cannot govern the data that feeds them. As we discussed in the previous slide about the platforms, so the data governance becomes really real only when it is embedded into the platforms people use every day, right? So one of the classic example that I have articulated is about Microsoft, where it helps with the execution foundation, and the purview sits above that foundation as a visibility and control layer, and it provides the enterprise-wide metadata lineage, classifications, and policy enforcement, and answering any critical questions about the data. And the other tools like Colibra, Erwin data quality, which is like the data intelligence suite, and there are other data quality tools that complements with governance in business, as well as helping the organizations or enterprises to manage their data stewardship, the ownership, and the policy. And as we know that the governance, it does not live in documents; it lives in the platforms that run the data. And another common questions leaders ask is whether data governance helps organizations move faster or slows them down. So this answer, it depends entirely on how your governance is designed. So when teams trust their data, they spend less time validating numbers and more time acting on insights, and trust becomes a direct accelerator of speed. And adaptability is equally important. So governance frameworks must be risk based and flexible, not just rigid or like one fit or one size fits all. So they can evolve as business needs and technologies change. And finally, effective governance strikes a balance between control and agility. So too much control creates bottlenecks, while too little creates risk. So that's where the organizations that succeed are the one, so that build guardrails rather than gates, and allowing teams to innovate quickly while still protecting the data, complying with regulations, and managing AI risk. In this model, governance, it does not slow process, rather it makes sustained speed possible. As we close, the key message to remember is AI scales fast, but governance is what makes that scale safe and sustainable. And whereas the governance build trust in the data, in the metrics, and in the decisions being made. When trust exists, organizations move faster. And because teams stop asking questions in the basics and start focusing on outcomes, that speed becomes even more critical in the age of AI, where decisions are automated and amplified at scale. So without governance, that scale becomes risk. With governance, it becomes a competitive advantage. The goal is not more rules or more control, but smarter guardrails that allow innovation to happen responsibly. And when governance is embedded into the platforms, leadership, and daily execution, It stops being a barrier and starts to become the foundation that enables confident analytics, defensible AI, and sustainable growth. The future isn't governed by data or AI alone. It's governed by trust. I will leave you with this thought. So the best way to predict future is to create it. So this week, map your data access bottlenecks, identify one you can remove, and that's how you can change, the processes within your company. And thank you for your time and attention. And um, now that I'm recording this video, if you have any questions, you have my email and my LinkedIn on screen. So please feel free to reach out for any questions that you would like to discuss, um, anything about data governance or any of the platform tools. Thanks and have a good day.